You're listening to More Than Reports, and I'm your host, Paul B. Felix.
In the last episode, Paul introduced System of Record reporting. In today's episode, he's taking it a step further. Learn why separating data from your transactional system and creating a staging area can help deliver the insights you need.
We've been talking about the importance of data architectures. They are important because there are many ways to go about it. It shouldn't be taken lightly. If you choose a path, it may lead you in the wrong direction, and that may have cost. So that's why it's so important. We've been talking about this for the last couple of episodes. So today we're going to keep forward in that direction. Last time we spoke about reporting direct or building reports or analytical systems directly out of systems of record. By that we mean your transactional systems where we typically run the business. But in the world of data and analytics, typically we have more complex artifacts and architectures, and we believe that's an important topic. We're going to continue that today, right, Paul?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so the next stage up, after we have spent some good time talking about system of record reporting, we call it staging, a stage. So I remember in big logistics projects. So this is a staging area for us to get to an oil rig or to a faraway place, a place where you stop and figures things out before you get to your final destination. What does it mean in the world of data, Paul? Staging.
Yeah. I guess to answer that, let's talk about why we would even consider going into staging. On our last episode, for anybody that didn't listen to that, we talked about system of record reporting, which is where we're connecting a analytical system or a BI front end straight to that system of record. Nothing in between.
Sounds great.
And it's wonderful. It's simple. We talked about that, right? It can be economical, but it has some limitations. And yeah, when you reach those limitations, that's when you're going to want to consider a different architecture. And we consider the first step up from a system of record reporting to be a simple staging area. So first of all, why would you even go to a staging area? In what case would the system of record reporting not be adequate? There's a lot of situations here. It could be something as simple as connectivity. You're not able to directly connect to your system of record. It could be that your requirements are putting too much of a load on that system of record because we're adding demand to a transactional system. We discussed that before. So that load could be a problem for your end users that are actually trying to utilize that system of record because you're likely going to degrade the performance. It could be a topology problem. Like maybe you just simply have too much or too many systems you need to connect to. It's just not feasible to do a direct system of record reporting process and accomplish all the other things you need to do with this data in order to get into a BI front end and have your analytics and KPIs established in the way you need them. So there's a few reasons. So once you hit those challenges, there's various steps in this we call the data solution pyramid that you can go through to solve certain problems. And the simplest solution that's beyond system of record reporting would be creating a staging area. And we actually lump two things in this category, staging and persistent staging. So I want to talk about both of them. So what is a staging area? A staging area is simply a location, we'll just call it a location for a minute, where we're going to extract data from the system of record and land it somewhere. We're going to store it somewhere. And that location is what we're then going to use as our source for the BI front end. Right? So now we've got three things in the picture here. We've got the system of record, we've got a staging area, and then on the end of the chain, we've got the business intelligence front end. Hypothetically, it could be anything, but whatever we're using for our analytical tool.
Could be Excel, right?
Could be Excel. Yeah, I mean, it could be direct query, could be a web service. But in any case, whatever we're using down there, whatever our needs are, it's going to use that staging area now as its source. So what advantage does this give us? Because we obviously complicated things, and our Our way of operating here at Leapfrog BI is always keep it simple for as long as you can. Only complicate the architecture when you absolutely have a reason to do so. So why are we complicating the architecture by creating this staging area? Well, we're doing it because we couldn't be successful with the simpler architecture of connecting directly to the system of record. And couldn't is kind of it's almost a Boolean connotation, but it's often not black and white, right? It's often not, well, I absolutely can't do this system record reporting and be successful, but if I do it this way, I'm going to have a lot of challenges. I might even have higher costs because I'm trying to overcome all these obstacles than I would if I simply created a staging area. So the staging area could be the more economical solution. But the reason we're creating the staging area is typically to overcome connectivity challenges. It's to remove the burden that we would be placing on the system of record potentially by adding that demand that's based on analytical needs. It could be to overcome integration challenges even, because sometimes it's easier, especially when companies are getting started, it's easier for them to just extract data. Maybe there's a application that provides some type of data extraction process. It's easier for them to simply, even manually in some cases, extract on a daily basis this file from 2 or 3 or 4 systems, put that file somewhere in a common location, and use that common location collection of files as their source for the BI front end. And that is a staging area. So I'll leave it at that for now. I know you want to get into some of the more complicated staging scenarios, but that's hopefully a brief overview of what a staging area is for.
Yeah, but leads me to think that we're just giving a name to something that most people may be already doing. Data extraction is such a intuitive way of dealing with it. Take anyone that is asked or tasked with, let's create a report. We need to go back and analyze some data. Oh yeah, I know I can go into my system of record there and get some data out of it. Usually you just hit export to CSV. So unaware of it, you might be already doing staging. I guess this is leading us to my next point of discussion. Um, Staging is more than just a technology; it's an approach. It is, instead of reporting out of directly the system, is extracting, and we use that word a couple of times, and it's incredibly critical in our world. The extraction step. So, what do you extract to, Paul? Though, the trivial step is, well, I got a whole bunch of CSV files. I name them in a way that I can recognize them, and I've been doing reports for a long time. Well, until you go on a vacation and someone needs to figure out your naming conventions, or you lose access to your disk, or someone leaves the company. So, what would be a natural way of making that process a little more robust?
Sure. You know, on your first point there, I totally agree. It's almost intuitive, right? If you're building this system, if you're not a data warehousing or a BI person or a data person at all, you could pretty much figure out, hey, I need to get access to my data. And that's likely something you're going to figure out. I export to CSV. Great. Now I got a file. I understand a file.
Yep.
I know what comma separated is, right? I know how to work with that.
I recognize those
And
columns, and that is my business, and I know how to create a graph and a chart out of that.
that's right. Super simple, intuitive, doesn't
And we
require.
agreeing that is staging. Isn't that right?
That's
All
staging.
right.
That's staging. Yeah,
In
whether we
one of
call it
its forms,
staging
in
or
its
not,
simplest form.
in its simplest form, yeah, could be no programming required, right? Like you said, click on the button that says export to CSV, export to whatever, text, Excel. Now you've got a file. That is a staging area. And again, the key difference here, I just want to repeat this, is that now your front end, whatever tool you're using, Power BI, whatever, is not connecting directly to your system of record. That's the difference. Instead, we're connecting to this interim extract that we've created, in this case, files, and that's why it's a staging area. We've simply staged data. What we didn't do is manipulate that data. That's key. All we did is stage it. We're going to talk about additional, data architectures down in future episodes. But at this point, we just extracted data and landed it somewhere in files. Now, files could be fine. Some databases actually used files as their storage engine, just like, you would do manually. So files could be just fine, but files themselves could have problems as well. When you are putting data into a file, I'm going to get a bit technical here. You have no metadata typically. If you're exporting to CSV, let's just say it's exporting to CSV. All that is text. That's it. It is, of course, a collection of columns. Basically, it's a tabular format with rows and columns, right? Each record on each row with some type of column delimiter and row delimiter, text qualifier, and whatever. But what it doesn't tell you is this first column is text. This second column is an integer. This third column is a float. This fourth column is, it doesn't tell you any of that information. It also doesn't tell you, hey, this file that I exported over here, file A, is actually related to this file over here, B, right? It doesn't give you any of that information. Those would be foreign keys. Of course, it's not in a file because a file is just text. So sometimes it makes more sense to, instead of putting data into files like that, you can actually put that data into a database. So you can get more tools, basically, and you can work more efficiently. You can also take advantage of the things that RDBMS's relational database management systems offer, such as referential integrity, data typing, various tools that are available to you. Now, I want to be clear that, in my opinion, it's staging. If you use files or if you store that data in a database, either way, it's still a staging area. It's just a choice you have to make. What type of storage engine are you going to use? Is it going to be a file in a file system, or is it going to be a database? Either one can get the job done. If you use a database, well, now you've got a different skill set, right? So that skill set might be, depending on where a company is in their process, it may not be feasible to even go into a database, because if you don't know the languages, you don't know how to manage the database, that's not going to make sense. Files will make sense.
Yeah, I love that scenario to draw a comparison. Well, it brings to my mind what really databases are, right? Let's go back a little bit here from the beginning of your description there. I downloaded a bunch of files, and you mentioned the word metadata. Metadata is the data that describes the data, right? So here is my sales. To which clients on what days and what amounts. And you can imagine some columns there, right there, that each one of those columns have a name metadata. It's data that describes those little values in each one of those cells. Beyond
Yeah.
that, the responsibility is entirely on the analyst to name the files. So the file names are the metadata. And if Joe likes to put his name on every file he works with, Mary might not, and that might create confusion. It's fine if you have one file. It's absolutely no problem, and that shouldn't even be a concern. As things grow, though, that's the importance of databases. They are systems that do that work for us. And you mentioned a couple of things that they are very good at is, well, file management. You really need to be into database to go inside the computer and look for where databases store their actual data, files. It's completely irrelevant for anyone running the business. Databases are really good at doing that without you being aware or necessarily being aware of that. So they solve precisely that problem very, very well, making sure that there is no confusion. It's all built into the database that these worries and potential problems are taken care of at the cost of adding skill to the process. And we in our discussions here, Paul, we invariably
Yep.
end up at what are the people that are doing the work.
And the cost, right? You're adding costs too when you
Right,
add a database,
exactly. So
depending on which one
it's it,
I guess you're
Mhm.
adding costs regardless, right? But for the software, you may be buying that software. So you have to consider that. That's a good point. When I'm talking about the metadata. Let me just expand on that a little bit. You know, if let's just say you're using Power BI as a front end. It's the front end we use most of the time. If you use a file as your staging area, you're still going to have to define that metadata. In Power
It's always
BI, you're
there.
going to have to
Yes,
declare,
it's
right?
always
You're going to
there.
have to decide this is a string, this is an integer,
Right.
and you may get it wrong. That's the problem, right? You may get it wrong. You may think that's an integer because it looks like an integer on the first rows that you manually review. But guess what? Here comes a string in that thing, right? Later on, and now your process has failed. You won't have that happen, at least not in that way if you're loading in this staging area in a database. Um, the other thing about a database is that it gives you the ability to also have a persistent staging area. So I think we should talk about that. That's really an important concept. That even I don't think we do a good enough job explaining why we advocate persistent staging areas, even to our clients, because we just this is part of our reference architecture. We pretty much do it every time that we are going to stage data. We're going to create a persistent staging area as well. Not in a cookie cutter manner, but because we have automated process for doing this, there's basically no additional overhead for us to go ahead and move into persistent. So what is a persistent staging area? First of all, persistent staging area, or PSA, as far as I can tell, is a name or a word that was made that SAP came up with many years ago. That's as far back as I could trace it. So if anybody listening has more information than that, please shoot us a note here.
It's is
But as
is
far
it
as
is
I
it
can
not a
tell,
Kimball creation? PSAs?
oh no, I
All
don't
right.
see any
Interesting. I did not know that.
nothing. Yeah, a colleague of mine, in fact, a friend of both of ours, is who introduced this concept to me many years ago, and it just seems like a great idea. So, what is it? So, you're starting. I got to talk about the systems of record again. Let's just say we got a customer table in the system of record. Well, that system of record is making decisions about how it persists data. It's going to potentially do things like overwrite values in place, right? If John moves from point A to point B, kind of the typical example, well, John's address in that customer table, I'm simplifying, it's likely a normalized collection, but anyway, let's say it's one table. That John's address in that table will be overwritten potentially. Now, that's fine if you want to know where John lives right now, but if you want to know where John lived, past tense, before that move, well, the source system can no longer answer that question. And that can be a really big
That's
problem.
lossy. We don't like that, right?
That is not acceptable to when we get to data warehousing and often general analytics. That is not an acceptable situation.
Well, I'll before you keep going, I would like to remind it's not acceptable to some regulators. You know,
Well, that's
there might
true.
be
Yes.
serious compliance issues there, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's lots of reason why that is a no go,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
That is just sometimes it's
Yeah.
fine, right? But sometimes it's not fine. And if it's not fine, that's when we move into this persistent staging area. And basically, you could think of the persistent staging area as having both of those records, both versions of that record. You have the version of the record where John Doe lived in Alabama, and you have the version where he lived in Nashville. Same record in the source system. And the source system doesn't have that Alabama version anymore. So what happens is this persistent staging area is collecting all changes that come in from that source system, which again, as we talk about future architectures and such, that can be a very, very important feature. So that's what a persistent staging area is in a nutshell.
It is a way to store individual snapshots in the entire life cycle of the data. So it guarantees there is no loss in information as history moves along, right? And
Yeah, I mean, there's always caveats, right? Because it depends on how often you're loading this data. Let's
mhm,
say we're loading in data where we're going to capture the state of this information daily.
mhm.
So if things change intraday, well, we don't have that either. But it's certainly a consideration here that needs to be thought of or thought about. And it's not just overriding values in place. It's things like hard deletes are another problem in source systems. someone might have deleted John Doe's record
Right.
from that source system. And they might have deleted it for all kinds of reasons. They're archiving data. The it's actually a user invoked deletion. The point is, persistent staging is part of a staging process. It typically is designed, at least when we do it, we'll usually design this in a way where you're first staging data, and we call that volatile staging, where we're just taking everything that the source system has today and putting it into a table, basically, an empty table. We truncate or empty that table before we load it. And then we merge that into a persistent staging so that we can detect, okay, well, this is what the source had today. This is what it's ever had in the past. If you see a record that's changed, I want that version of the record as well. And let's collect those through time.
Yeah, that can be really powerful in the sense that there is no, uh, well, except for the cases you just mentioned, throughout one day, if you are extracting daily, anything that happens inside a day would be lost. Uh,
That's right.
but you see where this is leading us, the importance of having very clear rules and understanding of what is important for the business. If you cannot afford to lose any record ever and do daily loads, well, I think we're in for a hard conversation with our system of records, right? Because if it allows that, that could be a problem for the business. Assuming we solve that part of the problem, downstream from that, as you in the future try to look back years maybe, and you could rest assured that you have every piece of information in any state it ever took along the way. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yes, that's good. A good description. I know we're probably short on time, but after we have this staging and persistent staging area in place, whether it's just simply file staging or maybe it's a database with staging and persistent staging, you now have complicated the process, right? Even the step to persistent staging is a bit more complicated because you now have versions of records that you have to utilize or call through when you're creating your analytical system or front end, whatever it is you're creating. So there's always pros and cons to everything. And I do think the basis of this decision-making process is always the cross-section between your source system topology and your analytical requirements. I think we mentioned that before. If you got very simple analytical requirements and you just got one simple source system of record reporting might get you by. But as either of those things kind of increase in complexity, well, then the architecture is going to have to change to accommodate that increase in complexity. And the first step, the simplest step to make, is going to be the staging approach.
And I think, Paul, we today talked about how powerful the whole staging, persistent staging architecture can be for a business. Imagine just the simple concept of never losing a history is amazing. Simple question: can that be done without a database at all?
Persistent
Yes,
staging, can that be done?
yes. Can you? Can
Well,
you?
it
Can you?
can.
Are you? Is it realistic to assume that Oh, I love the idea of um, persisting all my data's history in perpetuity. But I hate the idea of dealing with databases. Can you reconcile those two ideas?
You could save every file, timestamp every file you extract every day, and put it in an archive
That
folder,
doesn't
and
sound like
there's your
fun.
history. It may not be fun, but it's interesting that we all have our own challenges we're faced with, and it's possible that that's the right solution for somebody. That's why none of this is cookie cutter. You really have to understand what the requirements are, and I think you really have to have a clear view of what value you're actually trying to add.
True.
I've got to know when we're building this system that this is $1 million opportunity or this is a $5 opportunity, right? That has to come into the picture here at some point.
Very true. All right. So I think this has been a good one for us to go over the pros and cons, ups and downs of taking your data out of a system of record, moving it through what essentially is a pipeline that will lead you to the final destination, which is the screens of decision makers. And there's so many ways to get there. Next time we'll be talking about the next step up. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah, so next time we'll be talking about what we call an operational data store. It's just kind of the wild west of data architecture, so that should be fun.
All right. We'll see you next time.
All right, take care.
Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment below. See you in the next episode.